Disneyland would open up July 17th, 1955, which would mean the first ever 4th of July at Disneyland wouldn't happen until 4th of July, 1956. However, today I want to share with you the actual first ever 4th of July that happened inside of Disneyland, but this would be the first time ever guests would get inside of Disneyland, and it would also go down as one of the happiest days in Walt's life amongst some of the most stressful days in Walt's life. It was maybe his first sigh of relief. I think this thing might actually work. Brickey here with a story that's often forgotten, but today remembered. It's the story of the first ever 4th of July inside of Disneyland. For a select few people, they'd be the first people to ever see Walt's creation, 2 weeks before the world would. Before we can talk about the most exclusive 4th of July that ever happened in Disneyland's history, let's go to the first 4th of July. I'm talking about July 4th, 1956. 1 year into Disneyland's operation, not only would Disneyland open up a brand new land, they would also open up a new attraction that still runs today. An attraction that's been here for 68 years, and most folks still have never taken the time to ride it. Things would already start to change, new attractions would show up, and one of them just did. To celebrate America, Walt opened up 2 new attractions. It would be the beginning of the Indian War Canoes, and it would also be the beginning of a new home for the Indian Village. You see, the original Indian Village, it was done on the cheap, and it existed right on the edge of Aunt Jemima's Pancake House, going over to the Frontierland train station, which that's where you got on the Santa Fe Railroad. The Disneyland Railroad would just bypass you at that stop. For the first ever 4th of July for the public, 4th of July 1956, Disneyland would move the home of the Indian Village to the location that we now know today as Critter Country. For the new Indian Village, a tunnel was built just past Fowler's Harbor. The tunnel was designed to create a transition from the American frontier of the West to what lies beyond, the Native Americans, where guests would wander into where the indigenous people of North America lived and celebrated their culture. Friends, if you enjoy videos like today's where I break down Disneyland history for you, do me a favor, subscribe to Hey Brickey. The more people that come on board, the easier this all gets to keep showing up with 3 videos each and every week to do what we do on this channel. Study Disneyland's past so we can better predict its future. Thank you so much for showing up, and thank you twice for subscribing to Hey Brickey. I appreciate you. But there were actually 2 tunnels over in this region. One for the Disneyland Railroad and the Santa Fe Railroad to travel through for the transition from the American frontier to the indigenous folks, but also a walking tunnel so you or I on foot could leave past Fowler's Harbor and go into the Indian Village. Basically the portal design that we see so much today, where the idea is you make the world small so you can make it big again. So on the other side of the tunnel, the only reality you knew was that of the indigenous people. That tunnel would be right around in these parts, and then the Indian Village would be right over in here, where there was a giant roundabout that was painted with indigenous markings all around the bottom of it. This would essentially be the stage where the Native Americans would perform, and the guests of Disneyland would line all around this circle to learn about their historic ceremonies and celebrations. And the easiest way to place all of this, because the island has obviously changed shape over the years, you can look at the top corner of Fort Wilderness, and whenever you look at any of the imagery of the original Indian Village, or shall I say the 56 second Indian Village, the real one, the first one was pretty temporary, you can always see when they're over here performing their ceremonies, you can find the towers of Fort Wilderness behind the Native Americans. And aside from being able to learn about the Native Americans' cultures, folks could also get a good look at the Mark Twain going by, the kill boats, but also on the first official 4th of July in '56, the Indian War Canoes would show up. They were part of Frontierland and a part of the Indian Village. And on the opening days, they were actually piloted by 2 Native Americans, one in the front, one in the back. The original canoes were much smaller, much narrower than the big ones we have today. And the ones we have today, no, they are not on a track. They are real canoes, and I highly suggest doing them. The bottoms are very, very waxed, They glide across the rivers of America. Is it a bit of a workout? Yes. Is it a crazy workout? No. I would think most people should be able to commandeer a canoe for 10 minutes. And fun fact, if you don't try, the people around you still will. They were constructed by the Old Canoe Company of Old Town, Maine. They were made with varnished wood and then covered with canvas to resemble birch bark of canoes of a yesteryear. When this version of the Indian village would close in 1971, the boats would get renamed to a more polite name, the Davy Crockett Explorer Canoes. No longer commandeered by Native Americans, they had cast members on them that would wear coonskin hats that would largely do a lot of the work. But another little weird fun fact, female cast members would not be canoe guides until 1995. And Disneyland still does possess an Indian village, but now it is a set piece on the voyage around the rivers of America. Whether you do it by the Disneyland Railroad, the Mark Twain, on the Explorer Canoes, or aboard sailing ship Columbia. That part of this land's history is still being told here every single day with the exhibit of the current Indian village. Not what it once was, but a nice nod to what used to be inside of the park. And I love the way that Disneyland over the years has edited the rivers of America to keep it as one of the best vibe spots in the entire park. So for me personally, whether I'm on my second favorite attraction, the Disneyland Railroad, or riding above my favorite attraction, the Mark Twain, nothing beats taking a stroll around the rivers of America and just kind of getting away inside of a place that is always full of people, always full of loud noise. I do love that there is still a quiet spot to get away, even though right now I'm getting ready to get shot with a cannonball. Outside of that, it still can be a pretty relaxing place to go. Nice, a boat with only female cast members. Crazy to think that that was once not a thing. And friends, if you want a great way to support Hey Brickey showing up 3 times a week, make sure to grab yourself this beautiful Walt 1901 hoodie. Oh what, you can't see it? Don't worry, it's in the link below. Thank you so much for supporting Hey Brickey. Now back to our video. But the first official 4th of July happens inside of Disneyland about 2 weeks before the park would open up to the public. But how did Walt Disney pick the first ever people that got to come to Disneyland? It seems that back in Burbank at the Walt Disney Studios, there was a private dining room, and it was called the Penthouse Club. Kind of Club 33 a decade before Club 33. It was located on the top floor of the animation building, and membership to the Penthouse Club was limited to senior members of the studio and staff. So the Penthouse Club members and their family would be the lucky folks that would get picked to spend 4th of July, 1955 inside of Disneyland. These would be the first folks to ever visit Disneyland solely for entertainment purposes, and the first ever guests to get to enjoy a couple of Walt's attractions. And I think 2 things were happening here. One, he wanted to prove to everybody, I'm not crazy, this thing's gonna work. And 2, I think he wanted to prove, I'm not crazy, this thing is gonna work to himself when he could see guests finally step into his park and enjoy it. This first 4th of July becomes one of the first times ever Walt Disney gets to relax and actually enjoy his theme park. That might be what makes it one of my favorite Disneyland stories ever. But there were only a couple of attractions that the guests could actually enjoy because they had 2 weeks of mayhem ahead of them. About 80, 90 folks would show up, and they would have 2 attractions in their early operating stages for these guests to sample. One of the attractions that was open for guests on the very first 4th of July was none other than my favorite attraction, the Mark Twain, where guests could ride on board the Mark Twain and look over Walt's construction. Don't forget that Tom Sawyer Island wouldn't open up till a year later, so it was just forestry, and the Disneyland Railroad wouldn't have all of its beautiful landscaping yet, but they had the ability to ride aboard the Mark Twain and to look over Walt's creation and see it all coming together. You got to imagine what it must have been like to sit on the rails of the Mark Twain, look out with only a few people on the boat and wonder, what oh what has Walt Disney done? Is all of this going to work out? Because right now it's in a really, really rough state of construction, and it would have to open in 2 weeks from that first 4th of July. what I wouldn't have given to be on that boat on that day, celebrating America and celebrating Disneyland on the Mark Twain. Hey, what's up, friends? Celebrating Disneyland, celebrating America on my favorite ride, the Mark Twain. And what can I say? This is my favorite ride. Growing up on the banks of the Ohio River, on the border of Louisville, Kentucky and Jeffersonville, Indiana, riverboats run through my blood. So knowing that one of the very first things guests ever got to doing here was the Mark Twain sets this off as possibly the greatest 4th of July ever. But the other attraction happens to be my second favorite attraction.
Oh, lovely tattoos.
Thank you, sir.
What is that? Tentacles?
Yeah, it's
I
tentacles.
love it, mate. Be careful though. You look like you might be associated with Davy Jones. I try not to associate so much with Davy Jones, but whatever floats your boat, right?
Have a good day.
Very well, mate. Hello.
And the second offering that Walt's private guests would get would be they opened up the Disneyland and Santa Fe Railroad for the first time ever for guests. And keep in mind, back then, it was 2 different railroads that would join in different places, but here one train could go around the other. And because this whole thing was inspired by Walt's love of trains, I think that it's equally fitting that one of the first ever Disneyland days, the train was ripping all around the park. And for this big day, they fired up 2 of the trains. Ward Kimball was running the EP Ripley, where the CK Holiday would be driven all day by Walt Disney, who for the day would get to be train conductor and not large construction project manager. So with Ward Kimball operating one line and Walt operating the other, the boys were doing some laps. Roger Broggie, I think that's how you say the last name, said that the smile on Walt and Ward Kimball's face could not be removed. It was one of the happiest times he'd ever seen Walt, just getting to play with his train inside of his new creation of Disneyland. This would be one of the first times ever that guests would get to ride on the Disneyland Railroad. Now, they wouldn't get the view that we got today, but they would get to experience one of Walt's toys that he was so excited for everybody to see. Making this not only an epic way for fans to get to experience Disneyland, but also for Walt to fully get to see, I think this thing's gonna work, as he commandeered the CK Holiday, doing laps all around Disneyland, taking his guests with him, and just getting lost for the day. Being a big kid playing with his toy, he had sacrificed an immense amount of finances, personal stress, time with his family. Like, he put it all on the line. What a better way to celebrate the 4th of July holiday than seeing your dream is gonna come true while you're commandeering the CK Holiday. I am so fascinated to know what exactly did this first group of people on the first 4th of July get to see from the side of the Mark Twain or the rails of the Disneyland Railroad. What state was the park in 2 weeks before it opened? Because there are so many tales of Disney running around trying to chase its tail to get ready for that big opening day, where even on July 17th, they still weren't actually prepared. So what those guests must have seen, absolutely historic visit to Disneyland. But they got to roll around, have a picnic lunch, and then around sunset, they all went back home. About 10 days later, they would do a soft opening where Walt and Lillian would celebrate their anniversary. And then 2 weeks later, the general public would come in here, broadcast live on ABC when the world would finally see Walt's dream. But there was a select few that got to observe it, they got to celebrate it, and celebrate America on the 4th of July in this place. 4th of July, 1955. The first ever official 4th of July inside of Disneyland. They were also the first to see how happy this place would make Walt Disney in the twilight years of his amazing life. In 1976 on 4th of July, a record crowd of nearly 76,000 folks would flood into Disneyland because this is where they wanted to celebrate the American bicentennial. And then 3 years later, 4th of July, 1979, one family will never forget that 4th of July because it's where the first ever citizen of Disneyland, the first baby, was born in this area of the park. If you'd like to learn more about that and other crazy stories that have happened inside of Disneyland, check out my Disneyland Oddities series right here. Thank you so much for showing up. I appreciate you. And I appreciate your time. Hope you felt it was worth it.